Hello, dear lovers of beautiful stories. Welcome to an unforgettable journey through the Brazilian sertão of the 19th century, where love can flourish even in the most arid soils of life. Today I bring you The Marriage of Maria Esperança, a narrative that teaches us about dignity, courage, and how the human heart is capable of transforming pain into hope, loneliness into companionship, and arranged marriages into true romances. Imagine an 18-year-old girl being sold in marriage to save her family from misery. But this isn't a story of victimization. It's about how a strong soul can change destinies and hearts, even in the most adverse circumstances. And you who are watching this video, tell me, where are you joining us from on this literary journey? Leave your city in the comments. I love knowing that our stories reach so many different places. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave that loving like. This really helps our literature reach more hearts that need beautiful stories. Year, 1871. Location, Araripe Mountains, village of Santo Antonio das Flores, Ceará, Sertão. The June sun punished the central square of Santo Antonio das Flores when the auctioneer's hammer echoed for the last time over the 25 acres of the Andrade family. Maria Esperança, standing under the sparse shade of an oiticica tree, watched her world crumble with the serenity of one who had already cried all tears in silent nights. Her fingers caressed the wooden beaded rosary that had belonged to her mother, dead 3 winters ago, when the rains came late and tuberculosis arrived early. Beside her, Father Benedito trembled, not from the heat, but from the weight of shame that curved his shoulders, like an invisible yoke. 42 contos de reis, announced the clerk with the coldness of one reading a death sentence. Total debt of Benedito Andrade to Senor João Severino Cabral. Maria Esperança knew that name like a shadow that hung over the whispered conversations of adults. João Severino, the man who had stopped being a cangachero to become a rancher, carrying in his chest both scars and mysteries. Tall as a mandacaru cactus, skin burned by the sertão sun, eyes that had seen too much of life to be young at 38 years old. When he approached, his leather boots clicked on the dry ground like a drum announcing a storm. He didn't look at Maria Esperança immediately. He addressed the father with the distant courtesy of one who had already decided everyone's fate there. "Benedito," he said, and his voice carried the sung accent of the sertão, but also an authority that admitted no contestation. "You know I can't wait any longer." The silence that followed was filled only by the chirping of cicadas and the beating of Maria Esperança's heart, which seemed to echo in her ears like distant bells. She knew what would come next. She had sensed it in recent weeks, when her father began looking at her with that sadness that speaks without words. "But," continued João Severino, and for the first time his eyes met hers, "there is a way to settle this debt without needing jail." Maria Esperança held his gaze without blinking. She saw in those brown eyes a story she didn't yet know, but intuited as deep as a farm well. There was no evil there. There was fatigue, loneliness, and perhaps a timid hope that he himself didn't know how to name. "Your daughter," said João Severino, "in marriage. The debt disappears, and the boys stay under my protection until they can support themselves." The world seemed to stop. Even the cicadas fell silent, as if nature itself held its breath before that proposal that would forever change the course of 4 lives. Maria Esperança looked at her siblings. José, 9 years old, trying to look like a grown man, but with tears betraying his young age. Francisco, 7, clinging to his sister Rosa's skirt, only 5 years old, who cried softly without understanding why the adult world was always so complicated. There was no choice, and everyone knew it. But when Maria Esperança opened her lips to respond, her words surprised everyone, especially herself. "And you, sir," she asked with a voice clear as spring water, "what do you gain from this besides a wife who didn't choose you?" João Severino seemed to disarm for an instant, as if he didn't expect the girl to have her own voice in that negotiation. An almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Perhaps," he replied, "the chance to find out." But would an alliance of convenience be capable of transforming into something deeper, or was Maria Esperança simply trading one prison for another? 3 days later, Maria Esperança climbed into the carriage that would take her to Fazenda Boa Esperança, carrying only a small bundle with her few belongings and the weight of a decision that wasn't hers. The indigo blue dress that covered her was a gift from João Severino, fine fabric that contrasted with her hands, calloused from so much farm work and caring for her siblings. The farewell was a ritual of contained tears. Rosa hung on her skirt, José tried to be strong but trembled like a leaf in the wind, and Francisco murmured promises to one day come get her back. Benedito couldn't lift his eyes from the ground, carrying the guilt of having sold his daughter to pay for his vices in gambling and cachaça. "I'll return on Sundays," whispered Maria Esperanza in each one's ear, knowing it was a promise she might not be able to keep, but needed to say so as not to leave with her heart completely broken. During the 2-hour journey along the dusty road, João Severino rode beside the carriage, always alert, but respecting her silence. From time to time their gazes crossed, and she perceived in him an unexpected gentleness, like when he stopped so she could drink fresh water from a spring, or when he ordered the coachman to slow down upon noticing that the road stones were jostling her too much. Fazenda Boa Esperança emerged on the horizon like a mirage of prosperity amid the dried Caatinga. A big house with white walls and blue windows, a chapel dedicated to São Benedito, well-built corrals and a dam that reflected the sky like a piece of eternity. It was much more than Maria Esperanza had expected from a place that would be her new prison. "It's beautiful," she said, breaking the silence for the first time during the trip. "Now it's your home too," replied João Severino, and there was sincerity in his voice. "I hope that one day you can feel at home here." The wedding was celebrated in the ranch chapel by Father Cicero, who came especially from Juazeiro to officiate the union. The ceremony was simple but dignified: pure wax candles, flowers picked from the ranch garden, and the presence of a few agregados who formed a small, respectful congregation. When they exchanged vows, Maria Esperanza was surprised to notice that João Severino trembled more than she did. His hands were rough but gentle when placing the simple gold ring on her finger. At the moment of the kiss sealing the union, he only lightly touched his lips to hers, like one asking permission, instead of taking what he considered his by right. The wedding night arrived like all nights in the Sertão, suddenly with the sun disappearing behind the mountains in minutes and leaving the world under a mantle of infinite stars. Maria Esperanza was taken to the quarters that were now hers, a spacious, clean room with a double bed covered by a hand-embroidered cotton quilt and a window that faced the back garden. She waited, sitting on the edge of the bed, with her heart beating so hard she thought it would echo through the walls. When João Severino entered, closing the door behind him, he carried in his hands a bowl with warm water and a clean towel. "To refresh yourself," he said, placing everything on the dresser. "The night is very hot." They remained in silence for long minutes, he standing near the window, she still sitting on the bed, both navigating through the strangeness of that moment that would definitively seal their lives. "Maria Esperanza," he said finally, "I know you didn't choose me. I also know this isn't how it should be. I won't force anything you don't want to give of your own free will." She raised her eyes to him, surprised. She expected to find lust, haste, the brutality that women whispered about men who bought wives, but she saw only a raw honesty, almost painful. "So," she asked, "how will it be?" "It will be as you let it be," he replied, slowly, with respect, until it stops being obligation to become something else. That night, João Severino slept in the hammock on the porch, leaving Maria Esperanza alone in the matrimonial room. But before leaving, he placed on the dresser a rosary of golden beads, a gift whose meaning she would only understand much later. When she woke the next morning, she found on the pillow beside hers a mandacaru flower still moist with dew. How could a union born of necessity begin to sow affection in hearts that knew each other so little? The first weeks at Fazenda Boa Esperança passed like silent learning. Maria Esperanza discovered that her new home kept stories in every corner, whispered by objects and by the careful looks of the agregados who had lived there for years. Conceição, the housekeeper with graying hair and always busy hands, became her first companion. She was a woman of few words but eloquent gestures. She taught her where things were, how João Severino liked his coffee, that he rose before dawn to care for the animals and only returned for lunch when the sun was already high. "He's a good man," said Conceição one afternoon while they folded clothes on the line. "Different from what he was before." "Before?" asked Maria Esperanza, taking advantage of the opening to better know the man with whom she now shared a roof. Conceição looked around, making sure they were alone before speaking. From 15 to 25, he was a cangachero. He ran through the entire Sertão, from Pernambuco to Ceará. They say he killed 15 men, all in fights of honor or defending the weak from evil colonels. Maria Esperanza felt a shiver, but not of fear. There was something in the story that explained the sadness she sometimes saw in João Severino's eyes when he thought no one was looking. "Why did he stop?" she asked. "He witnessed something that broke him inside," continued Conceição, lowering her voice. "An entire family killed by mistake. Father, mother, and 3 small children. Since then he left the weapons and came here, trying to do good with his own hands." At night, during dinner, Maria Esperança observed João Severino with new eyes. She now saw in the scars on his arms not marks of gratuitous violence, but stories of a man who had carried the weight of difficult choices. When he asked about her day, she responded with more interest and noticed he did the same, truly listening, not just fulfilling courtesies. It was Raimundo, the trusted foreman, who told her about Ana Cristina. He was a black man, freed 12 years ago when João Severino decided there would be no slavery on his lands, and had for his boss a loyalty that went beyond work. "His first wife," said Raimundo, as they walked through the corrals at evening time. "Fine girl, daughter of a major from Sobral. Arranged marriage too, but she never conformed." "What happened to her?" Raimundo stopped before the small cemetery of the ranch, where a wooden cross marked an isolated tomb. "Ana Cristina Vasconcelos Cabral, 1849–1868, read the simple inscription. "She died at 19, said Raimundo. "She tried to poison the boss with bitter manioc root, but ended up taking the poison by mistake. It was a very sad time here at the ranch." That night, Maria Esperança couldn't sleep. She went up to the house's attic. A space that Conceição had mentioned was sealed since the first wife's death. The door wasn't locked, just ajar, as if waiting for someone to have the courage to open it. Ana Cristina's room was preserved like a shrine of memories. Silk dresses hanging in the wardrobe, French books on the dressing table, yellowed letters scattered over the writing desk. Maria Esperança picked up one of the letters and read it by the light of the candle she had brought. "My dear Antonio, I can't stand any more pretending to be the wife of a man I didn't choose to love. He is kind, but kindness is not love. You are my heart, my soul, my one and true love. Meet me at the dam under the full moon. I'll flee with you to where they won't find us." The letter was signed, "Forever yours, Ana Cristina," and dated 3 days before her death. When Maria Esperança came down from the attic, she found João Severino waiting for her at the foot of the stairs. There was no anger in his face, only a deep sadness and a silent question. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have—" "No," he interrupted her. "You live here now. You have the right to know the history of this house, and my history too." They sat on the porch under the moonlight, and for the first time João Severino spoke openly about Ana Cristina. "She was a delicate girl, full of dreams, but I didn't know how to make her feel loved instead of imprisoned. When I learned about her affair with Lieutenant Antonio Mendez, I wasn't angry. I was sad. I knew she would never be happy here." "And now?" asked Maria Esperança. "Are you afraid I'll be like her?" João Severino looked at her for a long time before answering. "You're different. Ana Cristina dreamed of a world that didn't exist. You have your feet on the ground but still dream. It's a strength she never had." When they said goodnight that night, Maria Esperança felt that something had changed between them. A door had opened, not to love yet, but to its possibility. Would Ana Cristina's story be an ominous omen, or would Maria Esperança manage to write a different destiny within those same walls? The following months brought Maria Esperança an unexpected discovery. She had natural talent for administration. João Severino, observing her skill with numbers and her ease in dealing with the agregados, gradually began sharing with her the responsibilities of the ranch. "You have a knack for this," he said one morning, finding her organizing the warehouse accounts with impressive precision. Ana Cristina never interested herself in these things. She thought caring for property was man's work. Maria Esperança raised her eyes from the ledger books. "Where I grew up, a woman who didn't know how to care for house and accounts suffered hardship. My mother taught me that work dignifies, whatever it may be." Thus began an unexpected partnership. João Severino taught her the secrets of cattle raising. She showed him more efficient ways to organize the cowboys' work. He took her to know every corner of the property, the pastures where grass grew greenest, the dams that never dried even in the hardest years, the cotton plantations that gave profit even when prices plummeted. But it was on a September afternoon, when they walked through the back of the ranch, that Maria Esperança discovered the place that would become special for both. An old centennial mandacaru grew solitary on a small elevation, its thorny arms pointing to the sky like a prayer of green stone. "I like to come here when I need to think," said João Severino, sitting in the plant's shade. "It's the highest place on the ranch. From here you can see everything, what I built, what I still need to build." Maria Esperança sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance but smaller than what they maintained weeks ago. "What do you see when you look at all this?" "A place where people can live with dignity," he replied, "where honest work is rewarded, where there's no hunger or fear. Maybe it's too big a dream for an ex-cangachero, but—" "It's not too big a dream," she interrupted him. "It's a necessary dream, and you're no longer an ex-cangachero. You're a rancher, a boss, a good man. The past doesn't define who you choose to be today." Those words touched something deep in João Severino. For the first time since they married, he looked at Maria Esperança not as the girl he had bought to settle a debt, but as a woman whose opinions mattered to him. "Do you also have dreams?" he asked. "I do," she said, looking toward the horizon. "I dream of a school for the children of the region, a place where they can learn to read and write, so they won't be at the mercy of those who know more. I dream of my siblings growing up free, studying, choosing their own paths." "Those are beautiful dreams," said João Severino, "and achievable." It was during this time that he began teaching Maria Esperança to defend herself, first with words, how to impose respect without needing to shout, how to read people's intentions in their eyes and gestures, then with hands, fighting techniques he had learned in Cangacho times, adapted so a woman could defend herself from larger and stronger men. "In the sertão," he explained, while teaching her to properly wield a peixeira, "a woman needs to know how to defend herself. There are men who think a wife is property, but you will never be anyone's property. You're my wife, but you own yourself." The lessons happened at the end of the afternoon, when the ranch work was finished and the sun began to hide behind the mountains. Maria Esperança proved to be an applied student, with quick reflexes and courage that surprised even João Severino. "You're not afraid," he observed, after she managed to disarm a simulated attack with movements that flowed naturally. "I am," she said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "But I learned that fear shouldn't paralyze. It should teach you to fight better." As the weeks passed, the coexistence between them became more natural. They talked during meals about ranch problems, planned improvements, discussed news that came from the larger cities. João Severino discovered that Maria Esperança had firm opinions about almost everything, and that her suggestions were almost always sensible. She in turn began to see beyond his physical imposingness, recognizing a man who carried scars not only on his body, but on his soul, and who tried every day to be better than he had been in the past. One night, when they were returning from a visit to the agregados who lived in the most distant part of the ranch, they were surprised by rain. They ran to take shelter under a huazeiro tree, and there they stayed waiting for the storm to pass, so close that Maria Esperança could feel the heat emanating from his body. "Maria Esperança," said João Severino, and his voice was different, softer, more hesitant. "May I ask a question?" "You may." "Can you already see me as something more than a stranger who bought you?" She took time to answer, weighing each word. "I can. You're not the man I imagined when my father accepted your proposal. You're better. Better how? More human, more possible to like." When the rain passed and they continued their journey, something had definitively changed between them. It wasn't love yet, but it was the fertile ground where love could grow. But in the sertão, storms sometimes come when least expected, and not all are of rain. The invitation arrived on a June afternoon, brought by a sweaty and anxious cowboy. Francisco Rabelo, owner of Fazenda Santa Rita, invited João Severino and his wife to the traditional St. John's feast on his lands. "Chico Rabelo," murmured João Severino as he read the paper, and Maria Esperança noticed his face darkening. "It's been years since he's spoken to me. Were you friends once?" she asked. "Acquaintance," corrected João Severino. "But Rabelo never liked me. He thinks an ex-cangachero shouldn't have his own land or mix with decent people." Maria Esperança studied the elegant invitation, written on fine paper with careful calligraphy. "Why does he invite us then?" "Good question, and one that makes me suspicious." Despite João Severino's reservations, they decided to accept. It was important for the ranch to maintain good relations with neighbors, and Maria Esperança, who had never participated in a large party, felt curious about how the rural elite of the region lived. Conceição spent days preparing Maria Esperança for the event. She sewed a new dress in fabric, brought especially from Fortaleza, green like mango leaves, with small flowers hand-embroidered on the neckline and sleeves. She also taught her the steps of the quadrilha, and the courtesies expected at a party of important people. "Remember," said Conceição on the eve, "you're now a ranch lady. You owe satisfaction to no one, only respect." Fazenda Santa Rita, impressed with its ostentation. A 2-story big house, gardens ornamented with plants brought from Rio de Janeiro, a ballroom with crystal chandeliers imported from Europe. More than 100 guests circulated through the spaces, illuminated by colorful lanterns, drinking punch and awaiting the start of the dances. Francisco Rabelo was a short and robust man, with a carefully trimmed mustache and small eyes that seemed to calculate the value of each person he spoke with. He received João Severino with exaggerated courtesy and kissed Maria Esperança's hand with lingering gallantry. "What beauty you brought to our party, João Severino," he said, without immediately releasing Maria Esperança's hand. "A pearl of the Sertão, without doubt." Maria Esperança withdrew her hand with delicacy but firmness, and perceived in Rabelo's eyes a gleam that caused her discomfort. João Severino also noticed, and his jaw hardened almost imperceptibly. "My wife," he said, placing his hand on Maria Esperança's back in a protective gesture, "is truly a blessing." During the first hours, the party proceeded without incidents. Maria Esperança was introduced to the other ladies, danced quadrilla with skill, and conversed about domestic administration and children's education. Some women showed genuine curiosity about her life at Fazenda Boa Esperança. Others, especially the older ones, barely disguised their disapproval of João Severino having married a girl of humble origin. It was during the second quadrilla that Maria Esperança met Antonio Mendes. The man approached when she was sitting, resting from the dance, while João Severino conversed with other ranchers about cattle prices. "Senhora Cabral," he said, making a bow. "Allow me to introduce myself. Lieutenant Antonio Mendes of the National Guard." He was an elegant man, about 30 years old, with wavy hair and refined manners. He wore an impeccable uniform and spoke with the perfect diction of one who had studied in seminary. "It's a pleasure," said Maria Esperança, offering her hand for the greeting. "The pleasure is all mine. I knew your predecessor well, Ana Cristina. She was a special girl." Something in the way he pronounced the name of João Severino's first wife made Maria Esperança look at him with redoubled attention. There was nostalgia in his voice, but also a poorly disguised bitterness. "From what I heard, she was indeed a special person," responded Maria Esperança cautiously. "Very special," continued Antonio Mendes, and his eyes lost themselves for a moment in distant memories. "A free soul, trapped in a cage that wasn't made for her. A tragedy, her death. All young deaths are tragedies. But some more than others, don't you think? Especially when they could have been avoided." Before Maria Esperança could ask what he meant by that, João Severino appeared beside them. The tension in the air became palpable. "Lieutenant Mendes," said João Severino with icy courtesy. "It's been a while. João Severino, I was just getting to know your new wife better." The words carried a subtext that Maria Esperança couldn't completely decipher, but that clearly bothered João Severino. The two men stared at each other for long seconds in a silent battle of wills. "If you'll permit me," said João Severino finally, "I'd like to dance with my wife." Antonio Mendes smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. "Of course. After all, now she's your property, isn't she?" The provocation hit its target. João Severino took a step forward, but Maria Esperança quickly stood up and touched his arm. "Let's dance," she said firmly. "The music has already started." While they danced, Maria Esperança noticed that João Severino was tense, his movements less fluid than usual. "Who is he really?" she asked quietly. "Ana Cristina's lover," replied João Severino, "and probably the man who convinced her to poison me." The revelation hit Maria Esperança like lightning. Now she understood the bitter sadness in Antonio Mendes's eyes, the words laden with double meaning, the tension between the two men. "Are you sure?" "I can't prove it, but yes, and I suspect Rabelo helped him. Ana Cristina wouldn't know where to get poison alone." When the music ended, Maria Esperança looked around the party with new eyes. She now saw not just an elegant celebration, but a minefield of old resentments and dangerous secrets. "We should leave," she whispered to João Severino. "Not yet," he replied. "Running away would show fear, and I won't give them that satisfaction." But Maria Esperança was beginning to realize that some satisfactions cost too much to be denied. What more would she discover at that party about the past that insisted on haunting the present? The return trip from the party proceeded in contemplative silence. João Severino drove the carriage with redoubled attention, eyes always alert to the movement of shadows that the growing moon projected on the Caatinga. Maria Esperança, beside him, reflected on the night's revelations, especially about Ana Cristina's diary, that she had found hidden in a secret drawer of the dressing table, in the attic. The yellowed pages confirmed her worst suspicions. Ana Cristina had really planned to poison João Severino with Francisco Rabello's help, who had provided the bitter manioc root. The plan was to flee with Antonio Mendes after the husband died, but Ana Cristina, nervous and inexperienced, ended up ingesting the poison she had prepared. "João Severino," she said finally, deciding to share the discovery, "I found something today that you need to know." But before she could continue, he raised his hand, asking for silence. His years as a cangachero had sharpened his instincts for danger, and something in the night wasn't right. The crickets had stopped singing abruptly, and an owl hooted 3 times in succession, a signal that his old companions used to warn about ambushes. "Hold tight," he said, whipping the horses. The attack came when they passed the curve near the ranch's dam. 5 masked men emerged from the bushes, armed with shotguns and machetes. The horses whinnied in fright, and the carriage swayed violently when João Severino pulled the reins, trying to change direction. "Jump and run to the Caatinga," he shouted to Maria Esperança, drawing the revolver he always carried. But she didn't run. In the months of training, João Severino had taught that in moments of real danger, instinct is more important than the plan, and her instinct said she shouldn't abandon her husband. The shots began to crack in the night. João Severino shot with the precision of one who had learned to fight to survive, but it was 5 against 2, and the attackers knew the terrain. A bullet pierced through the leather vest he wore, barely missing his heart. "Are you hurt?" shouted Maria Esperança. "The leather saved me," he replied, continuing to shoot, "but I'm out of ammunition." It was then that Maria Esperança did something that surprised her. She grabbed the pechera that João Severino had given her for protection and jumped from the carriage. One of the attackers came running in her direction, machete in hand, confident it would be easy to subdue a defenseless woman. He was wrong. Maria Esperança dodged the first blow using a technique João Severino had taught her, spun her body, and buried the blade in the man's arm. He howled in pain and surprise, stumbled and fell backwards on the rocky ground. "Devil woman!" he shouted, trying to stanch the blood spurting from the wound. The shout distracted the other attackers for a crucial second. João Severino took advantage to draw his reserve pechera and advance on the nearest one. The fight became hand-to-hand, brutal and quick as all Sertão combats were. When everything ended, 3 of the attackers fled to the Caatinga, carrying the wounded. On the ground remained torn masks and bloodstains that the dry earth would soon drink. João Severino looked at Maria Esperança with a mixture of admiration and concern. She was pale but firm, still holding the bloodied pechera. "You killed a man," he said softly. "No," she replied, cleaning the blade on her dress skirt. "He's still breathing, but he won't use that arm for a while. You weren't supposed to stay. You were supposed to flee. And let you die alone? Never." That word, never, pronounced with absolute conviction, touched something deep in João Severino's heart. For the first time since they left the church on their wedding day, he looked at her not as a wife chosen by circumstances, but as a companion chosen by the heart. They walked to the stone cross that marked the ranch's entrance, where they stopped to make sure they weren't being followed. The moon illuminated their tired faces stained with dust, but also revealed something new in both their eyes. "Maria Esperança," said João Severino, taking her hands, "I need to tell you something. Tell me, when I saw you fighting today, when I saw you choose to stay instead of flee, I realized I don't want you to be just my wife out of obligation anymore." She looked into his eyes, seeing in them a vulnerability he rarely showed. "What do you want me to be then? My wife by choice, my true companion, my beloved." The word hung suspended between them like a promise and a question at the same time. "Do you love me?" she asked directly. "I do," he said without hesitation. "And you?" Maria Esperança took time to answer, not from doubt, but because she wanted to be sure the words would come out right. "I love you too, João Severino. I don't know when it started, but today when I thought I might lose you, I knew it was true." The kiss that followed was different from all others, not a fulfillment of duty, but a choice made by 2 hearts that finally found each other. When they separated, João Severino pressed his forehead against hers and whispered, "Now they know you're not just decoration. They'll try to use you against me." "Let them try," replied Maria Esperanza. "I learned from the best teacher." But who had ordered that ambush, and what would they do when they discovered the plan had failed? The days that followed the ambush were of intense preparation. João Severino, wounded but determined, summoned all the men of the ranch for a meeting in the main yard. Cowboys, agregados, free workers, all listened seriously to the explanation about the attack and what it meant. "Someone wants me dead," he said, without beating around the bush. "And while this person isn't stopped, we're all in danger. Whoever wants to leave can go now with my blessing and 3 months advance payment." No man moved. Raimundo, the foreman, stepped forward. "Boss, these people here owe you more than wages. You gave land to plant, school for the children, freedom to those who were slaves. No one will abandon this house in the hour of fight." Maria Esperanza, watching from the big house veranda, felt pride for her husband and the loyal men he had won with justice and respect. But she also felt the weight of responsibility she now carried. She was no longer just the protected wife. She was part of the ranch's leadership. Conceição approached her that afternoon, bringing a carefully folded package. "Dona Maria Esperanza," said the housekeeper, "I have something that might interest you." Inside the fabric was a small but well-cared-for shotgun, along with ammunition and a worked leather holster. "It was the first wife's," explained Conceição. "Ana Cristina never knew how to use it, but the boss had it made especially for her. Now I think it should be yours." Maria Esperanza picked up the weapon, feeling its weight and balance. It was a beautiful and functional piece, made for a woman's smaller hands but with enough power to be respected. "Conceição," she said, "I need to know something. Did you suspect that Ana Cristina was planning to poison João Severino?" The older woman sighed heavily. "I suspected, yes. She was acting strange, nervous, asking weird questions about plants and herbs. But she was the mistress. I was the servant. It wasn't my place to speak." "And now? If you knew something that could harm us, would you speak?" "With you, I would speak. You're different. You don't think you're better than anyone, but you also don't make yourself lesser than you are." That night, after the defense preparations were organized, João Severino and Maria Esperanza sat on the porch to talk about what would come next. The waning moon barely illuminated the caatinga, creating shadows that seemed to move with their own life. "Do you think it was Rabelo who sent the attack?" asked Maria Esperanza. "I'm certain," replied João Severino, "but certainty isn't proof. And in the Sertão, accusation without proof becomes family war that lasts generations. So we wait for him to attack again? No, we'll give him the opportunity to show his true intentions." João Severino explained his plan. The next day he would circulate news that he had discovered evidence about Ana Cristina's death and was going to present it to the authorities in Sobral. It was a lie, but a lie that would force Rabelo to show himself. And if he doesn't fall for the trap, he will. A guilty man always thinks others know more than they really do. Maria Esperanza took her husband's hand, feeling the calluses that told the story of a life of hard work. "João Severino, may I ask you a question?" "Always." "Do you still think about her? About Ana Cristina?" He took time to answer, choosing words carefully. "I think about the injustice that was done to her. I think about what I could have done differently, so she would feel happy instead of desperate. But I don't think about her as a man who lost love. Because real love I only knew after you arrived. Even knowing that at first, I didn't choose you. Especially because of that. At first neither of us chose, but every day since then we've chosen each other anew. That's worth more than 1,000 marriages by passion that don't resist life's difficulties." A movement in the caatinga interrupted the conversation. João Severino immediately stood up, hand on the peixeira's handle, but relaxed when he recognized Raimundo's silhouette approaching. "Boss," said the foreman, "there's a man at the gate. Says he brings a message from Senor Rabelo." It was a boy about 12 years old, son of an agregado from Fazenda Santa Rita. He trembled with fear and cold, clearly sent against his will. "Speak, boy," said João Severino with a gentle voice. "Nothing will happen to you here." "So Francisco told me to say," stammered the boy, "that if you drop this story of going to Sobral, he forgets what happened. But if you don't drop it—" "If I don't drop it, what?" The boy looked at Maria Esperanza before completing. "He said that next time it won't be just you who will suffer." The veiled threat against Maria Esperanza made João Severino's blood boil, but he kept calm in front of the boy, gave him food and shelter for the night, and only afterward allowed himself to show the anger he felt. "Now, it's not just about Ana Cristina anymore," he told Maria Esperanza. "It's about you, and that I won't tolerate." War was declared, but who would fire the first shot? The answer came from where João Severino least expected. On an August morning, when the first signs of drought began to appear in the yellowing leaves of the huazeiro trees, a desperate cowboy arrived galloping as if carrying the devil behind him. "Boss, Dona Maria Esperança," he shouted even before dismounting. Something terrible happened in Santo Antonio das Flores. Maria Esperança felt her blood freeze in her veins. Her siblings lived in the village under the church's protection, cared for by Father Cicero, while João Severino fulfilled his promise to support them until they could manage on their own. "What happened?" asked João Severino, holding the foaming horse by the bridle. "It was during the St. Anthony feast, boss. Some masked men invaded the church during the procession. They took the 3 children, José, Francisco, and little Rosa. They left a note saying that if the lady goes alone to Fazenda Santa Rita, they'll return alive." Maria Esperança leaned against the house wall to keep from falling. Francisco Rabello's evil had surpassed all limits she imagined possible. Using innocent children as bargaining chips was cowardly, even for a man without scruples. "And my father?" she asked with a trembling voice. Seu Benedito tried to protect the boys. "He took a shot in the shoulder, but he'll live. He's at Father Cicero's house being cared for." João Severino was already shouting orders for Raimundo to prepare horses and weapons, but Maria Esperança touched his arm, stopping him. "No," she said firmly. "If we go with armed men, Rabello will kill the children before we can do anything. Ha's counting on that. I won't let you go alone into a trap, and I won't let my siblings die because of our fight with Rabello." They stared at each other for long seconds, 2 equally strong wills in conflict. It was Conceição who broke the impasse, approaching with a regional map spread in her hands. "There's a way," she said. "I know Fazenda Santa Rita like the palm of my hand. I worked there before coming here. There's a passage through the back, through the old corral. If you go through the front, talking and buying time, the boss can enter from behind." João Severino studied the map, his strategic mind calculating distances and possibilities. "It might work," he murmured, "but it's dangerous." "Every plan is dangerous," said Maria Esperança. "The difference is that this one can save the children." They spent the rest of the day organizing every detail. Maria Esperança would go alone, mounted on the gentle mare, carrying only the pechera hidden in her boot. 2 trusted cowboys would accompany João Severino by the alternative route, and everyone would meet at Rabello's big house yard at nightfall. "Remember," said João Severino, kissing his wife's forehead before departure, "you're not going to surrender. You're going to buy time for me to arrive. Be smart, gain time, but don't sacrifice yourself." "And you remember," she replied, "that now you have a wife to return home to. Don't do unnecessary heroics." The trip to Fazenda Santa Rita took 3 hours, 3 hours during which Maria Esperança prayed all the rosaries she knew and invented some new ones. The Caatinga seemed hostile, with thorns that scratched for no reason, and birds of ill omen chirping in the dry trees. When she reached the gates of Rabello's property, the sun was already hiding behind the mountains, painting the sky with blood tones that augured nothing good. Francisco Rabello waited for her on the big house porch, dressed as if going to a party, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Beside him stood Antonio Mendes, Ana Cristina's former lover, now clearly allied with the rancher. "Maria Esperança," said Rabello with false cordiality, "what a pleasure to receive you in my house. Although the circumstances are unfortunate, where are my siblings?" she asked directly, not dismounting from her horse. "In a safe place, don't worry. Precious children, especially little Rosa. So innocent, so fragile." The implicit threat made Maria Esperança grit her teeth, but she kept her voice controlled. "I came as you asked. Alone. Now free them." "Ah, but we have matters to resolve before that. Dismount, please." "Let's talk like civilized people." Maria Esperança knew that dismounting meant losing her only chance of quick escape, but she also knew she needed to buy time for João Severino to arrive. She dismounted slowly, tying the mare to a nearby tree, but leaving her saddled. "Very well," said Rabello, descending the veranda steps. "Now tell me, where did your husband hide the evidence about Ana Cristina's death?" The question confirmed that the plan had worked. Rabello really believed that João Severino had proof that could incriminate him. "What evidence?" asked Maria Esperança, feigning confusion. "Don't play dumb. I know you found something. Her diary, perhaps? Or letters?" Antonio Mendes approached, and Maria Esperança saw in his eyes a madness she hadn't noticed at the St. John's feast. "She knows," he told Rabello. A smart woman like that doesn't marry a man without knowing his secrets. True, said Rabelais. So let's make things easier. Bring the children. 2 henchmen appeared from the house dragging José, Francisco, and little Rosa. The boys were dirty and scared, but seemed unharmed. Rosa cried softly, calling her sister's name. Seeing her siblings like that broke something inside Maria Esperanza's heart. But it also awakened a cold fury she didn't even know she possessed. You're cowards, she said, taking a step forward. Real men don't use children to resolve their fights. Real men, replied Rabelais, do whatever is necessary to protect their interests. And you, my dear, are a problem that needs to be solved. It was then that Maria Esperanza heard the sound she was waiting for, the low whistle of a wirapuru, a bird that didn't sing at that hour of day. It was the signal agreed upon with João Severino. The real battle was about to begin, and this time there would be no masks to hide the true enemies. The wirapuru's whistle was followed by a tense silence that seemed to extend beyond the borders of Fazenda Santa Rita. Maria Esperanza knew she had few minutes to keep Rabelais and Antonio Mendes's attention focused on her, giving time for João Severino and the cowboys to position themselves. Very well, she said, taking another step forward. I'll tell you what I know. But first I want to see my siblings free. Rabelais laughed, a sound without humor. You're not in a position to make demands, my dear, but I'll show how generous I am. He gestured to the henchmen, and one of them cut the ropes that bound José's hands. The 9-year-old boy looked at his sister with eyes that tried to be brave, but she saw in them the fear of a child who had grown up too fast in the last hours. José, she said softly, do you remember what I taught you about the Lord's Prayer? It was a code they had agreed upon in childhood. When someone in the family spoke about the Lord's Prayer, it meant the others should prepare to run. I remember, sister, replied the boy, and she saw that he understood. Ana Cristina, said Maria Esperanza, turning to Rabelais, really planned to poison my husband. I found her diary, hidden in the attic. She writes about a man who convinced her she would be free if João Severino died, a man who provided the poison. Antonio Mendes grew agitated, taking a nervous step. What else did she write? That this man promised to marry her afterward, that they would flee together to Pernambuco, that the plan was perfect because no one would suspect a devoted wife. It was a lie, but a convincing lie. Maria Esperanza saw the agitation grow in both men, especially in Antonio Mendes, who began pacing back and forth like a caged animal. She also wrote, continued Maria Esperanza, improvising, about letters you exchanged, letters that still exist. Impossible, exploded Antonio Mendes. I burned all the... He stopped mid-sentence, realizing he had given himself away. Rabelais looked at him with a furious expression. Idiot, he growled. She's bluffing and you fell for it like a child. It was at that moment that everything happened at once. Rosa, frightened by the shouting, managed to break free from the henchman holding her and ran to Maria Esperanza. João Severino and the cowboys emerged from the corrals with weapons in hand. Rabelais's henchmen ran to take cover behind the veranda pillars. Now! Shouted Maria Esperanza to her siblings. José took Francisco by the hand, and both ran to the back of the house following the route Conceição had indicated. Maria Esperanza picked up Rosa and ran behind an abandoned cart in the yard. Rabelais drew a pistol and shot in João Severino's direction, but the distance was too great for a short-barreled weapon. João Severino advanced with the peixeira in hand, ignoring the shots whistling beside him. Come, coward, he shouted. Let's settle this like men. Antonio Mendes tried to flee, but one of the cowboys intercepted him near the corrals. They fought briefly, but the ex-military man was out of shape, accustomed to salons and not real combat. The main duel took place in the center of the yard, under the light of the full moon that had emerged between the clouds. Rabelais had thrown away the empty pistol and now wielded a long peixeira, trying to use his greater weight as an advantage. You should have stayed in the bush, he shouted, attacking with the blade. João Severino dodged with the agility of one who had fought all his life. And you should have learned to lose like a man, he replied, counter-attacking. The fight lasted few minutes, but seemed an eternity to Maria Esperanza, who watched while protecting Rosa with her body. Both men were skillful, but João Severino had the advantage of experience, and, more importantly, was fighting for love, not pride. The end came when Rabelais, tired and desperate, made a movement too risky, leaving himself open. João Severino could have killed the man right there, burying the peixeira in his heart. Instead, he cut his wrist, making him drop the weapon, and placed the blade at his throat. "You're going to live," said João Severino, panting, "but you're going to answer to justice for your crimes. And if you ever get out of jail, if I learn you came near my family again, then I'll finish what you started today." They tied up Rabello and Antonio Mendes, along with the henchmen who survived without serious injuries. The next morning, all would be taken to Sobral, where they would face the imperial authorities. When the dust settled and the wounded were cared for, Maria Esperança finally could embrace her siblings. José tried to look strong, Francisco cried softly with relief, and Rosa wouldn't let go of her older sister's neck. "Never again," she whispered, kissing each one's head. "Never again will I let anyone harm you." João Severino approached, still dirty with earth and sweat from the fight. "Are you all well?" "Now we are," replied Maria Esperança. When they looked at each other, there was something new in both their eyes. Not just love, but the absolute certainty that they could count on each other in any circumstance. They had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. But would this be the end of their problems, or just the beginning of a new life for the entire family? The trial of Francisco Rabello and Antonio Mendes in Sobral became the most talked-about event in the region. For the first time, a wealthy rancher would be tried for the same crimes that would send a poor man straight to Fernando de Noronha, and all local society watched to see if imperial justice would truly be impartial. Maria Esperança and João Severino traveled to the city to testify, bringing with them the evidence they had collected. Ana Cristina's diary, letters found in Rabello's house during the search, and the testimony of the henchmen who decided to cooperate in exchange for lesser sentences. The public prosecutor, Dr. Henrique Matos, was a young man, educated in Recife, who saw in the case an opportunity to show that the law applied to everyone, regardless of social position. During interrogation, he managed to get Antonio Mendes to confess his participation in the plan to poison João Severino. "I loved her," shouted the ex-military man when pressed. "Ana Cristina was pure, innocent, prisoner of a marriage she didn't choose. Francisco told me it was the only way to free her." Rabello tried to deny everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. Moreover, his arrogance during the trial didn't favor him before the jury, composed mainly of small merchants and artisans who had no sympathy for arrogant ranchers. "Gentlemen of the jury," said Dr. Matos in his final speech, "this is not just a case of attempted murder and kidnapping. It's a case that defines whether we live in a society of laws or in a society where the power of money is above justice." The conviction was unanimous. Rabello got 25 years in prison at Fernando de Noronha, Antonio Mendes 15 years at the same penitentiary. The henchmen received lesser sentences and were sent to regional prisons. But what most impressed Maria Esperança was Benedito's reaction during the trial. Her father, still recovering from the shoulder wound, followed the entire process and at the end asked to speak with her privately. "Daughter," he said with tears in his eyes, "I want to ask your forgiveness. For having sold you, for having put my weakness above your right to choose, you became a better woman than I ever was a man." "Papa," she replied, taking his trembling hands, "the past is past. What matters now is the future we can build together." It was then that Benedito made a decision that surprised everyone. He announced that he had completely stopped drinking and gambling and asked to work at Fazenda Boa Esperança, not as an agregado, but as a salaried employee. "I want to make up for lost time," he said. "I want to meet my sons-in-law, see my grandchildren grow, be the father you deserve to have." João Severino didn't hesitate to accept. "Every man deserves a second chance," he said, "and you'll work directly with me, taking care of the ranch books. Maria Esperança told me you were always good with numbers." The change in Benedito was remarkable. Away from drink and gambling, he proved to be an intelligent and hard-working man, who quickly became an important piece in the properties administration. With Rabello convicted, his lands were auctioned to pay debts and compensation. João Severino bought part of the property, but not for himself. He divided the lands among the agregados who had served faithfully, creating a system of small properties that would make the entire region more prosperous. "Why did you do this?" asked Maria Esperança one night while they reviewed the division papers. "Because land concentration in the hands of few is what creates men like Rabello," replied João Severino. "When each family has its own land, no one needs to submit to evil colonel's whims." João Severino's decision created a model that began to be copied by other progressive ranchers in the region. Fazenda Boa Esperança became known not only for prosperity, but for the social justice it practiced. Maria Esperanza's siblings flourished in the new environment. José, now 10 years old, showed talent for handling cattle and dreamed of having his own ranch someday. Francisco, 8, preferred books and already talked about studying to be a teacher. Rosa, 6 years old, was the joy of the house, running through the corridors and inventing games that made everyone laugh. "They'll have the opportunities we never had," said Maria Esperanza to Juan Severino one afternoon, watching the children play in the yard. "And they'll know how to value them," he replied, "because they knew the price of freedom." One December afternoon, while organizing Christmas preparations, Conceição brought news that made everyone happy. She was pregnant. "At 43 years old," she laughed. "Who would have thought I still had that surprise saved? The house will get even livelier," said Maria Esperanza, embracing the housekeeper who had become like a mother to her. "It will indeed," agreed Juan Severino. "And this child will grow up in a real family, not just a house." But the greatest gift was still to come, and would forever change the dynamics of Fazenda Boa Esperança. The spring of 1872 brought abundant rains and news that filled Fazenda Boa Esperança with joy. Maria Esperança was expecting her first child. The discovery came on a September morning when she fainted during the milking of cows, being carried home by Raimundo and Conceição. "It's a boy," declared Dona Francisca, the most respected midwife in the region after examining Maria Esperança. "Has the look of a boy in the belly, and by the strength it already shows, it will be a worker like the father." João Severino, who waited nervously on the porch, received the news with a smile that illuminated his entire face. He entered the room slowly, as if afraid to break some spell, and knelt beside the bed where Maria Esperança rested. "A child of ours," he murmured, placing his hand on his wife's still flat belly. "A child made of love, not obligation. A child who will grow up free," added Maria Esperança, covering his hand with hers, "who will choose his own path in life." The months of pregnancy passed serenely. João Severino became even more protective, insisting that Maria Esperança reduce her heavier activities and dedicate herself only to house supervision and the ranch books. She protested at first, but ended up appreciating having more time to dedicate to the projects she had dreamed of. The main one was the school. With Father Cicero's help, who came periodically from Juazeiro to give catechism classes, Maria Esperança began teaching first letters to the children of the ranch and neighboring properties. The classroom functioned in the main hall of the big house, furnished with benches built by the cowboys themselves. "Reading and writing is freedom," she said to her small students, among whom was Rosa, proud to learn the same lessons that her older sister taught. "Who knows how to read can't be deceived. Who knows how to write can tell their own story." In March 1873, after a labor that lasted all night but proceeded without complications, Antonia Cabral was born. She was a strong girl, with dark hair like her mother, and determined eyes that reminded one of her father. When Maria Esperança held her for the first time, she felt that her life was finally complete. "She's perfect," whispered Juan Severino, delicately touching the tiny fingers of his daughter, "and she'll be strong like her mother." "And just like her father," added Maria Esperança. Antonia grew surrounded by love and attention. José and Francisco took turns playing with their niece. Rosa invented songs to make her sleep, and Benedito proved to be a dedicated grandfather, telling certain stories that made the girl's eyes shine with curiosity. 2 years later, in 1875, Juan Benedito arrived, a boy who inherited his father's stature and his mother's calm temperament. The family was now complete, and Fazenda Boa Esperança buzzed with life and laughter. "2 children," said João Severino one afternoon, while watching Antonia teach her younger brother to take his first steps. "A real family." "And what a family," laughed Maria Esperança. "Between our children, my siblings, Papa, Conceição and her son, we have a small village here." Conceição had given birth to a robust boy, Antonio, who grew up with the house children as if they were all siblings. The housekeeper had become even more indispensable, caring for everyone with the dedication of one who had finally found her place in the world. The ranch's prosperity grew year after year. The herd multiplied, cotton plantations yielded good profits, and João Severino's reputation as a just boss attracted the best workers in the region. But what most made Maria Esperança proud was the educational project she had created. The school at Fazenda Boa Esperança had become a regional reference. Children came from distant ranches to study, and Maria Esperança had managed to convince 3 girls from the capital to come work as teachers in exchange for house, food, and decent salary. "You're changing the future of this region," said Father Cicero during one of his visits. "Education is the only revolution that really transforms the world." "It's what I always dreamed," replied Maria Esperança, watching a class of 15 children reciting multiplication tables in chorus, "that no child nearby grows up without knowing how to read and write." Jose, now 16 years old, had become João Severino's right hand in ranch administration. Francisco, 14, had confirmed his vocation for teaching and was being prepared to study at the normal school in Fortaleza. Rosa, 12 years old, had revealed talent for music and dreamed of forming a choir with the school children. "Look what they became," said Benedito to his daughter one afternoon, while they watched her younger siblings working and studying. From children orphaned of mother and with a father lost in drink, they transformed into youth with a future. "We all transformed, Papa," replied Maria Esperança. "The difference is that now we choose who we want to be." One December afternoon in 1876, while the entire family gathered to celebrate Antonia's 3rd birthday and João Benedito's 1st birthday, Maria Esperança stepped away from the party a little and went up to the attic that previously kept Ana Cristina's sad memories. The room had been transformed into a library, with books donated by regional ranchers and some bought with ranch profits. At the old desk where Ana Cristina had written her desperate letters, now Maria Esperança prepared lessons and planned the school's future. "Thank you," she whispered to Ana Cristina's portrait that she had commissioned based on Conceição's descriptions. "Thank you for showing me that it's possible to write a different ending to the same story." When she went down to join the family, she found João Severino waiting for her at the foot of the stairs. "What were you thinking about up there?" "About how blessed we are," she replied, taking his hand. "And about how our story is just beginning." But what other chapters did life still hold for that family that had learned to transform difficulties into victories? The years that followed were of constant growth and achievements that surpassed Maria Esperança's most ambitious dreams. The Boa Esperança Rural School, as it became known, became the first educational institution in the interior of Ceará to train rural teachers, creating a model that would be copied in several other regions of the Northeast. In 1880, Francisco departed for Fortaleza to complete his studies at the normal school, carrying in his luggage not only books and clothes, but the blessings of the entire family and the promise to return to help expand the educational project. Jose, who had initially been reluctant to study, discovered his passion for veterinary medicine after a visiting professor from Recife spent 3 months at the ranch teaching modern cattle breeding techniques. "I want to study to be an animal doctor," he announced one June night during family dinner. "Not to abandon the ranch, but to make it even better." João Severino smiled with pride. "Veterinarian is a profession the Sertão greatly needs. You'll be the first in the family." "Second," corrected Maria Esperança, looking at Antonia, now 7 years old, who devoured books with the same hunger with which other children devoured sweets. "This girl has a head for medicine. I see it in her eyes." Antonia raised her eyes from the science book she was reading. "I want to be a doctor for people, Mama. To care for women when they have babies, like Donna Francisca." The declaration caused some commotion at the table. Medicine was a man's profession, everyone knew. But João Severino, after a few seconds of reflection, said something that surprised even Maria Esperança. "If that's what you want, we'll find a way. An intelligent woman can't waste her intelligence just because she was born a woman." Rosa, now a 16-year-old young woman, had become the school's music teacher, teaching singing and flute to the younger children. Her choir performed at religious festivals in the region and had won recognition even from the Bishop of Fortaleza, who came especially to hear them sing. João Benedito, at 5 years old, showed signs of having inherited his mother's practical intelligence and his father's natural leadership. He ran around the ranch after the cowboys, asked questions that revealed sharp curiosity about everything he saw, and already demonstrated special ability for dealing with numbers. "He'll be an administrator," prophesied Benedito, who at 55 years old had become the ranch's official accountant and family pride. "Or maybe a politician. He has a way of convincing people." The Cabral family's prosperity was reflected not only in the accounting books, but in the region's social transformation. Fazenda Boa Esperança had become a center of progress irradiation, attracting other ranchers interested in modernizing their properties and improving their workers' living conditions. In 1882, the government of Ceará province sent a commission to study the rural education model developed by Maria Esperança. The final report recommended creating similar schools throughout the interior using Fazenda Boa Esperança as a standard. "You created something greater than a school," said Dr. Joaquim Nogueira, head of the commission, during the official recognition ceremony. "You created a model of how progress can reach the sertão without destroying its traditions." Maria Esperança, now 30 years old and recognized as one of the region's most influential women, received the honor with the simplicity that always characterized her. "I didn't create anything alone," she said. "Everyone here contributed. My husband with support, my siblings with work, my father with experience, Conceição with wisdom, and especially the children who taught me that educating is an act of love." It was also in 1882 that news arrived that saddened the entire family. Francisco Rabelo had died in Fernando de Noronha prison, victim of yellow fever. Antonio Mendes was still serving his sentence, but according to information from the Ministry of Justice, he had become a different man, dedicating himself to teaching other prisoners to read and write. "I prefer to remember him like that," said João Severino when they learned the news, "as someone who found a way to redeem himself, even behind bars." Maria Esperança agreed. "Everyone deserves a second chance. Ana Cristina also deserved one, even though she wasted hers." In that same year, the family received an unexpected visit that brought memories of distant times. Father Cicero arrived one October afternoon, accompanied by a man whom João Severino immediately recognized, despite the gray hair and wrinkles that time had carved on his face. It was Joaquim Caboclo, an old companion from Cangaço times, who had abandoned nomadic life to become a farmer on a small property in the interior of Pernambuco. "João Severino," he said, embracing his old companion, "I came to ask your forgiveness for not believing when you said you were going to leave Cangaço. I thought it was weakness. Today I know it was the greatest courage I ever saw a man have." "There's nothing to forgive, Joaquim," replied João Severino. "Each one follows the path the heart points to. Mine brought me here." During the 3 days Joaquim stayed at the ranch, he told stories of old companions, some dead in ambushes, others imprisoned, few who managed to regenerate like the two of them. But what most impressed the ex-Cangachero was the transformation he saw in João Severino. "You're no longer the same man," he said on the eve of departure. "You're better, more complete. That's what happens when you find your true family," replied João Severino, looking at Maria Esperança, who was playing with Antonia and João Benedito in the yard. Life stops being about surviving and becomes about building. But life still held surprises and challenges that would test the strength of that family once more. The year 1888 arrived, loaded with changes that would shake not only Fazenda Boa Esperança, but the entire empire of Brazil. In May, news of slavery's abolition reached the Ceará Sertão like a wave of hope and apprehension at the same time. For João Severino and Maria Esperança, who had already practiced free labor for more than 15 years, the law only made official what was already reality on their lands. But for many ranchers in the region, it represented a radical change they didn't know how to face. It was at a meeting at the Sobral mayor's house, convened to discuss abolition's impacts, that Maria Esperança made a discovery that would forever change her understanding of the family's past. During the meeting's intermission, while walking through the official residence's gardens, she was approached by a middle-aged black lady, elegantly dressed, who addressed her with a voice trembling with emotion. "Are you Maria Esperança Cabral?" asked the woman. "Yes, I am. Can I help you with something? My name is Francisca Andrade. I am your mother's sister." The world seemed to stop around Maria Esperança. Her mother had died when she was 15, and she had always believed she had no living relatives besides her father and siblings. "My aunt," she whispered. "But why did I never know about you?" Francisca looked around, making sure they were alone, before continuing. "Because your mother wasn't my father's legitimate daughter. She was his daughter with a slave. When she was born, Papa gave her to a poor white family to raise as if she were their daughter." The revelation struck Maria Esperança like lightning. Her mother, Esperança Andrade, the sweet and hard-working woman who had raised 5 children with love and dignity, was the daughter of a slave. "Did she know?" asked Maria Esperança, feeling her legs weaken. "She did know. but she made me promise never to tell. She was afraid you would suffer prejudice. She said she wanted her children to be free not only in law but in heart. Francisca then told the complete story. Maria Esperanza's mother had been born on a ranch near Huaziro, daughter of the white rancher with a slave who died in childbirth. Instead of raising her as a slave, the rancher gave her to a couple of agregados who had no children, with the condition that they never reveal her origin. Your mother grew up free, continued Francisca, but always knew where she came from. When she married Benedito and you were born, she sought me out. We met in secret whenever she could. She spoke of you all with such pride. Maria Esperanza felt hot tears running down her cheeks. Why are you telling me this now? Because now it doesn't matter anymore. Slavery is over. And because you became an important, respected woman, I want you to know you have family, you have roots, that the blood running in your veins is from strong people who survived the worst this world has to offer. That night, back at the ranch, Maria Esperanza told everything to João Severino. He listened in silence, holding her hands, absorbing every word. Does it change anything for you? She asked when she finished. It does change, he said, and her heart tightened for a moment. It changes, because now I understand where your strength comes from. I understand why you never let yourself break, even when everything seemed lost. Don't you feel deceived? Married to someone who has slave blood? João Severino took her face in his hands and looked into her eyes. Maria Esperanza, I married a woman who transformed an ex-cangachero into a good man, who created a school that's changing this region's future, who fought like a lioness to protect her family. If that blood you discovered you have is part of what made you like this, then I thank God for it. The conversation was interrupted by Antonia's arrival, now 15 years old, who entered her parents' room as she always did before sleeping. May I tell her? Asked Maria Esperanza. It's your story to tell. Maria Esperanza also called Juan Benedito 13 years old, and Rosa, now a 24-year-old young woman who had married a teacher from the region, but continued living near the family. Jose was in Recife, studying veterinary medicine, and Francisco had become director of the municipal school in Santo Antonio das Flores. When the entire family gathered in the living room, Maria Esperanza again told the story that Francisca had revealed to her. She observed the dear faces while speaking, looking for signs of shock, disappointment, or rejection. She found none. So, our great-grandmother was African? Asked João Benedito with genuine curiosity. How interesting. From what part of Africa? It's not interesting, said Antonia with her characteristic seriousness. It's important. It means we're descendants of people who fought to survive, who maintained their dignity even in the worst circumstances. Rosa stood up and hugged her sister. It means we have even more reasons to be proud of who we are. Benedito, who had remained silent during the entire revelation, finally spoke. Daughter, your mother was the most dignified woman I ever knew. If she had the courage to carry that secret to protect you all, it was because she knew the world wasn't ready yet. But you're making the world ready. That night, after everyone retired, Maria Esperanza and João Severino remained on the porch talking about how that revelation changed or didn't change their lives. Do you know what impresses me most? She said. It's that my mother managed to raise us without hatred, without rebellion, even carrying a pain we could never share. And she managed to raise children who are changing the world, added João Severino. Each in their own way, but all making a difference. Do you think she would be proud? I'm absolutely certain. But how would this revelation affect the family's future and their place in that era's society? 23 years had passed since that June morning when Maria Esperanza climbed into the carriage that would take her to a life she hadn't chosen. Now in 1894, at 41 years old, she sat on the same big house veranda, but as a completely transformed and transforming woman. Fazenda Boa Esperança had become legend in the Northeast. The school that began in an improvised room now occupied its own building, built with resources from the community itself, and trained teachers who carried knowledge to the most remote corners of the Sertão. More than 200 children had already learned to read and write there, and many of them were now respected professionals in their communities. João Benedito, at 19 years old, had departed for Salvador to study medicine, fulfilling the dream the family had nurtured for him since childhood. His letters arrived full of enthusiasm for his studies and promises to return to care for the Sertão people's health. Antonia, at 21 years old, had broken all conventions by becoming the first woman to graduate in obstetrics in Bahia. She had returned to Ceará the previous year and was already attending births throughout the region, winning families' trust with her competence and delicacy. José had realized his dream of becoming a veterinarian and now cared not only for the herds of Fazenda Boa Esperança, but provided services to dozens of neighboring properties. Francisco directed the largest rural school in the interior of Ceará, in Santo Antonio das Flores, and Rosa had formed 3 choirs that performed in festivals throughout the Northeast. Benedito, at 65 years old, continued active as the ranch's administrator, but now spent most of his time teaching arithmetic to the school children, a way of giving back to life for the opportunities his children and grandchildren had received. João Severino, at 61 years old, maintained his usual energy and determination, but now divided his time between ranch administration and a project that had become his passion, creating agricultural cooperatives that allowed small proprietors to compete in the market under fairer conditions. "I never imagined we would live to see so much change," he said one afternoon, sitting beside Maria Esperança on the wooden bench they had placed under the old mandacaru where they had talked so many times during their first years of marriage. "Neither did I," she replied, watching the children play in the yard, grandchildren, nephews, workers' children, all together in a harmony that seemed natural but had been carefully constructed over the years. "But I think the biggest change was within ourselves." In that year of 1894, Maria Esperança had begun writing her memoirs, encouraged by a journalist from Fortaleza who wanted to document the family's story as an example of social progress in the Sertão. Every night, after the house activities ended, she sat at Ana Cristina's old desk, now her work table, and put on paper the memories of a life that seemed to have lasted much more than 4 decades. "Will you tell the whole truth?" João Severino had asked when she began the project. "All of it," she had replied, "the good and the bad, the moments of joy and sadness, because it's the complete truth that can inspire other people to believe it's possible to change destinies." One December afternoon, while writing about the first days at the ranch, Maria Esperança was interrupted by an unexpected visit. It was a young woman about 20 years old, well-dressed but with nervous eyes, who asked to speak with her privately. "My name is Luisa Rabelo," said the girl, and Maria Esperança felt a chill hearing that surname. "I'm Francisco Rabelo's daughter." Maria Esperança invited the young woman to sit on the veranda and offered fresh water, observing her with curiosity mixed with caution. "I came to ask forgiveness," continued Luisa, "for the crimes my father committed against your family, and to thank you." "Thank me. My father died in prison when I was 12 years old. I could have grown up with hatred, wanting revenge, but my mother, before dying too, told me the truth about what he did, and she told me that Senor João Severino had the opportunity to kill him, but chose to turn him over to justice." Luisa explained that she had become a teacher and wanted to work in a rural school, inspired by the example of the Boa Esperança school. "I want to transform the Rabelo name into something that brings good to the world, not evil." Maria Esperança looked at that young woman who carried the weight of a stained surname, but had in her eyes the determination to redeem it, and saw in her a bit of herself, someone fighting to write a destiny different from what circumstances seemed to determine. "Luisa," she said, "if you really want to make a difference, there's a position here for a primary letters teacher. The salary isn't much, but the house is good and the mission is among the noblest that exist." The young woman began to cry. "Would you really accept me after everything?" "Children don't inherit their father's sins," replied Maria Esperança, "and whoever has the courage to seek redemption deserves the opportunity to find it." That night, after Luisa settled into one of the guest house rooms, João Severino commented to his wife, "You continue surprising people with your capacity to forgive." "It's not forgiveness," said Maria Esperança. "It's understanding. I understood long ago that carrying hatred is like carrying burning coal. The one who gets burned is the one carrying it." On Christmas Eve, 1894, the entire family gathered at Fazenda Boa Esperança for the annual celebration. There were more than 30 people among children, daughters-in-law, sons-in-law, grandchildren, siblings, and agregados who had become family. The main table was extended 3 times to accommodate everyone, and conversations flowed in multiple directions, creating a symphony of voices and laughter. During dinner, Maria Esperança stood up to make a toast that would become memorable for all present. 23 years ago, she said, raising her wine glass, "I was a girl without choice, sold in marriage to save a family from misery. Today I'm a free woman, surrounded by the greatest wealth anyone can have, The love of people who chose to love me and whom I chose to love. She looked at João Severino, who smiled with eyes moist with emotion. I learned that love isn't something that happens by chance. It's something built every day with patience, respect, understanding, and much courage to be vulnerable. Then she looked at each of the children, siblings, at the father who had redeemed himself, at Conceição who had become a second mother, at everyone who formed that unlikely but solid family. I also learned that family isn't just blood. It's choice, it's commitment, it's being present in difficult moments and celebrating victories together. You taught me that it's possible to transform even the hardest beginnings into happy endings. She raised her glass higher. That's why I toast. To the love that brought us here, to the courage that made us grow, and to the hope that will always carry us forward. The chorus of voices that responded cheers echoed through the house and seemed to spread through the Caatinga outside, like a prayer of gratitude rising to the heavens. Later, when everyone had retired and the house was silent, Maria Esperança returned to her office to write the last lines of her memoirs. If someone someday reads these pages and is going through a difficult moment, I want them to know, no matter how dark the path seems, there's always a door to the light. Sometimes that door is love that arrives when we least expect it. Sometimes it's courage we discover in ourselves. Sometimes it's simply the decision not to give up. I was Maria Esperança, the girl who was sold. Today I'm Maria Esperança Cabral, the woman who chose her destiny. And if I could do it, so can you. True love isn't one that's born ready. It's one that's built brick by brick, day after day, until it becomes a solid house where two hearts can live in peace. This is my story. This is our story. And it hasn't ended yet. It has just begun a new page. She closed the notebook, extinguished the lamp, and went to join her husband, who waited for her in bed with a smile and open arms, as he had done for more than 20 years. Outside, the centennial Mandacaru extended its arms toward the starry sky, silent witness to a love that had grown against all odds and become legend in the Sertão.